to the cloud. Okay,
Ah,
there we go.
thank you. Well, welcome to tonight's presentation from the Spartanburg County Public Libraries on wills, estates, and probate records. My name is Charity Rouse. I am the Director of Local History for the Spartanburg County Library System, and we are glad to be presenting this both live on Zoom and recorded on the library's YouTube channel. There are plenty of previous genealogy programs from the last couple of years there, so feel free to check in on that. If you are not joining us live, there is a handout, and that can be requested via the Kennedy Room account, KROOM at infodepot.org. That address will also be on the final slide of the program. So we're glad that you are here, and we are going to dive into some definitions first. So, what is a will? I mean, we're talking about wills, estates, and probate. So let's define those. A will is the official testament of someone as to what they want done with their land, money, and other belongings when they die. It is a legally binding document if it is witnessed and registered correctly. This is a 1860s, I think, will of John Bethay in Marion County, one of my ancestors. So, what is probate? The official process of dealing with the estate of a deceased person through the courts. So, the estate is the what? The land, uh, personal property, and other things that are being talked about. The probate is the process through the courts, and the will is how someone says how it needs to be distributed. Um, if in the process of probate there is an argument or it's taking 20 years and the eldest children want to divide up the probate and the estate before the youngest are 21. There are some ways to see if you can get a faster answer. In South Carolina, we call this equity court. And in Virginia and some other states, they call it chancery court. And then there are other states that may use different names for this, but there is always a court that helps with the process if there is a complication. Due to heirs under 21, outstanding debts, money owed to the deceased, and other considerations, probate can sometimes take years. I have seen probate cases take up to 60 years. So sometimes you are looking at something and the index entry says a date that is well after the date that your ancestor or the person of interest has died, but you need to look at it if the names and locations are correct, because you may find one of these cases where the widow was young or the youngest heir was an infant, and you're going to have at least 20 years at that point. And then there are sometimes other complications with businesses and outstanding debts owed to the deceased that can cause delays in the whole process. So, does every person have a will and or a probate file? Unfortunately, no. It can depend on the laws of the time period and the location, what types of property they owned, how much. Is it real property, real estate, or is it personal property, the things of our lives? Um, is the person a male with a family? That ups the chance there's a probate case. If the person is female, is she single or widowed? Did she have personal property that she had the legal right to bequeath? Um, Widows could bequeath property. Um, Single women, married women, overall, until the late 1800s, generally did not have the right outside of their marriage to bequeath property. But sometimes you find exceptions. Are there significant debts to others? That ups the case of there being a probate because the people who to whom debts are owed are going to press to get the money. Was the death expected or unexpected? If the death was expected, there's often a will, often a probate. If the death was unexpected, sometimes the planning isn't there. So probate will happen whether or not there's a will. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. Do realize that not all documents survive, and sometimes our cousins were unscrupulous with the record and decided instead of writing down the information, they were just taking that paper out of the file at the clerk of court's office and didn't get caught. So it just depends. But sometimes you get lucky and get a treasure trove. So, some terms that you're going to see in these documents: a testament, which is another term for a will. Last will and testament is often a phrase we hear. The testator or testatrix. Testator is male, testatrix is female. That is the one who makes a will. That is the person testifying. Testate, they died with a legally valid will that is provable in court. The witnesses show up and say, yes, I saw this person sign this will. It is what they said they wanted to have happen. Intestate means they died without a will. So there was no will, or the will could not be proven. Either the witnesses couldn't show up and say, yes, I saw this, because in the intervening time they have moved or they have died, and there's no one who can attest to the fact that the person stated this will. Administrator or administratrix, the person or persons appointed by the court to administrate a probate where no executor was named. So there are two sets of names that do the same job. It just depends on whether there is a will or there wasn't a will. The executor or executrix is the person named by the person giving the will, the testator or testatrix, and approved by the court to carry out the instructions in the will. Sometimes you end up with an administrator because the person that the will names as the executor says, I'm not doing that. I don't want to do that. I can't do that. I have a conflict of interest. So sometimes you think you're going to have an executor and you end up with an administrator. Okay, so some things to consider, and we'll get to examples. Believe me, I've got plenty of examples here. You need to remember time frame and location. So at various times, you're going to find wills in different places because county lines have changed over time. State laws are going to differ between states, territories, and over time. So if you're not finding what you think you should find, then you may want to step back and see what is actually available in that time and location. You may find your ancestor or person of interest as a witness, a court official, guardian, beneficiary, purchaser of items being sold, etc., and maybe not as primary in the document of the person who died, the person who's administrating. You may find an earlier version of a will, which is not the official testament validated in probate. You see this often when, say, a soldier is going off to war. I actually saw a fantastic document that was a Civil War era soldier who wrote a will in 1861 or two before he went off to war. And it specified what was to happen to the land, the money, and the enslaved that he owned. And then, of course, you find the official will in 1890, whatever. Um, and obviously, it's going to be a very different will because 1865 happened. The Civil War had finished, slavery was no more. And so you may find that earlier version of the will, but it is invalid because a lot of things changed between the two. It is most often filed in the county where the person died, which may or may not be the county where the person lived. They may have gone to live with a child in their last year or years or even weeks. And so sometimes things are filed in a slightly different place than you thought they should be. But also look in that original place where the person died, particularly if there is property in that county. Um, if they owned property in multiple counties or places or states, there is often a copy filed in each of those locations, um, but not always. So you'll have to check different things if you're not finding it where you expect it. And sometimes it just didn't get filed because everybody thought we got filed somewhere else. And then the age of children does need to be taken into consideration. For a very significant part of our country's history, the age of 21 has been the legal age of adulthood for things like this. Doesn't mean you can't serve in the military younger. It doesn't mean you can't do other things younger, but age 21 is often when things got settled. So, where do you find wills and probate? Um, in the US, you're going to look at the county level first, unless you are in New England, in which case it is the township level. And that's about all I know about New England research. You look at the township level. But the courthouse, the county courthouse or clerk of court's office for the courthouse. A lot of these do have online access, some of which is behind a paywall. A lot of Virginia records are behind paywalls. Um, but many still do not have distance access, Spartanburg County being one of them. You literally have to go talk to the clerk of court's office and hope that you hit them on a good day. You may find the records have been microfilmed at some time or other, either by the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints out in Salt Lake City, or by state libraries or archives in the state where it is. Microfilm allows you to see the images without having to go see the actual record. You may want to still go and see the original record because sometimes the images are not great. But you may also find printed abstracts or transcriptions at libraries as well. FamilySearch.org, which is the website of the LDS Church, has image files from microfilm. You can search through the catalog, some indexed online, some now included in their full text search. And we will be talking about that full text search upcoming in March's program. So stay tuned for more about that. At the state or regional archive or library, depending on the state, in South Carolina, it is the State Archive and Department of Archives and History is their official name. In Virginia, it would be the Virginia Library of Virginia. That's the official repository. And they may have scanned some of the wills and probate from their collections. It is a multi-step process no matter where you find the records. And let's look at a little bit. Microfilm is still being digitized, but it is still around as well. We've got 15 cabinets of microfilm in the Kennedy room. And so we have new microfilm machines coming in the next number of weeks. So we are still using microfilm. It's a great storage medium that helps with compact storage. You see an example of a newspaper there on the right. On Family Search, they've digitized all of the 2.5 million rolls of microfilm that they had filmed uh, by 2017 when they stopped filming and started digitizing. Um, but not all of it is online yet because still dealing with permissions from some of the rights holders. And then also, it was slow getting into their name index in their name search. They have added a lot of these rolls of microfilm into their full text search. Um, but bad handwriting stymies the machines as much as it stymies us humans. So you'll have to sometimes do some digging. But you will need to treat the digitized images like the microfilm for best results. And what I mean by that is when you are looking at the books, the record books, or the microfilm, the finding aid is the subindex. And you are looking for two things in the index. And there is always a page of instructions at the beginning of each book, whether it is on in print form or whether it is on microfilm form or whether it has been digitized. You have to go back to the beginning of that roll of film digitized to find the subindex. With the subindex, and there are a couple of main uh, producers of these indexes, but they all generally work about the same way. You have the first section of the subindex, which just gives you last names. They're done by phonetic spellings. So sometimes you have similarly spelled names that sound the same that they are going to index together because they are so often intermingled in how people have spelled things. So on this, at the bottom left, you can see Adkins, Adkins, and Atkins, Atkins. So those are both on page, I didn't write this in my notes, I think it's 67. Um, and so you go to the second part of the subindex, or to the general index, and you look at page, well, that's not helping me either. Looks like 17. So it may have been 17 there. But you see 17A, and you get 17A, you get 17B, you get 17C, and you get the various versions. So you get both Atkins with a D, it's 17A, and Atkins with a T. And you see there, you've got surname or family name listed on the left. They break up the forenames, the given names, into three sections alphabetically to just help you visually be able to read the page faster. And then the other names are the names of the administratrix or the guardian or administrator or executor. So you get a sense of who this person is and what their role in the case may be. A guardian would be a financial guardian for anyone under 21 or for a woman who was not representing herself, which was fairly common. As I said before, women didn't have all that many rights for a very long time, and so you often see um, a male in her life representing her in whatever the case may be. Then you see on next set to the end is the file number, and that gives us a file number for where we're going to go next. And you get a date of the file. They are typically earliest to most recent in the list. Not always. Sometimes somebody missed a file and or it was misplaced or borrowed, or whatever. And then when they got back into the record, it will get listed. So do check through the dates just in case if you're not finding it in the date range you think it's going to be. So 336 is that first Green Atkins file number. And so we're going to look at this case 336, which is an intestate case, so no will. And it started in 1863 and went on for a minute. On the microfilm, they filmed Spartanburg County file number 336 at the beginning of the records in this file. And then at the end of it, there is another screen that they put in there that says end of estate. So between those, and often in no particular order, are the papers that were in the estate. And I have seen estates be multiple hundred pages long. It can get very involved. One guy whose case I looked at had a half interest in a hotel. So the person inventorying wanted to get their pay for inventorying, and they went through every hotel room and half interest in the sheets and in the towels and in the uh, soap holder and all of those things. So it was rather lengthy, but very repetitive on the inventory of the estate. So on this is the example of this Green Atkins 336. DEC apostrophe D is just the abbreviation for deceased, a lot quicker to write. At the bottom left, the pages have often been numbered within the file. Um, they may not have been filmed in order, but at least there's some way of tracking what page you've looked at or what page or what page. Hey, we missed something, and so you're going back and forth through these pages to find it. Um, but they do typically uh, film both the front of the page and the back of the page. The back of the page is on the right here, and that tells us where things were filed and dates and key names in the document. So in this case, the administratrix is Polly Atkins, and there is a form, or in earlier years before they had the printed forms, the clerk of court would write out the boilerplate information, copy that into the record, and it does say that Polly Atkins is the administratrix of the estate. Um, it's not as clear on this one, but there are plenty of places in this file where she is signing with her mark, with an X, her mark. So, literacy is not always what we think it was. And as long as you could do the math, and as long as you could supervise the process and get things going and keep things moving, you didn't have to be able to read and write. It helped, but you didn't have to. But you had to be an administratrix or administrator or the executor or executrix, and have letters of administration so that you could go to the debtors, you could go to the bank, get funds released for immediate use of the family, those types of things. But you had to account for all of the money coming in and out. This was recorded in Book B, page 40 for the court for that, but again, the copy is in the probate file. In South Carolina, we do have a combined probate file, which is very helpful, but there are some places where you can check for pieces of an estate if they did not make it into the combined or if it's disappeared. On this one, there are assessors appointed to inventory personal property. And these are usually neighbors or people in the community who are trustworthy to somebody. One of them's got to read and write, because they're making a list of all of the real property and personal property that the deceased had. And it's the administratrix of the goods, chattels, and credits of Green Adkins. And then there's a signature down, and who they delivered it to, at the who witnessed them doing the work. So you may also find interesting things that tell you a little bit more about the household. Um, in this Green Adkins estate, there is a bill for boarding Polly Atkins. It's $200 for the year. And so someone is taking care of housing and feeding Polly Atkins while the estate is being settled. And as I said, this is 1863. Women were starting to get some rights and be able to do things on their own accord, but there were also limitations on what women could do. They had to make a request to sell personal property to keep the family going. And Polly, as the administratrix, would have done that. And then there's a petition. There's a plan for the division of the estate. Hey, this is who's going to inherit. This is how it's going to be divided up. Had to go to the judge. And then the petition for the final settlement. So they've had the estate sale. They've done everything. They're petitioning the judge to say, hey, we're done. As I said, these are not always filmed in order because here we get a yearly accounting for 1862 of expenses and income. So they had 45 bushels of corn for $45, 4 bushels of wheat for $6. And so there's some income coming in to be put against the estate. And then there's a bill of sale for goods that are sold. So bedsteads, um, tools, enslaved, all of those pieces of personal property um, that are sold and to who they were sold. Polly bought a number of things herself because she was going to have to continue to live and she needed a bed and she needed whatever. But it was all in her husband's name and estate. She did not own it until she was able to buy it from this sale. Because he didn't have a will, so he didn't leave her the bedstead and things, which you do also see. In the inventory of personal property on the left, and some accounting notes and figures in the scratch paper side of it, and then the settlement of the estate, who got what, how it was divided, what was left. And then the court gave permission for the sale. As I said, again, sometimes you like these to be in order, and sometimes they're more interesting not in order. And then there was a rejected claim against the estate. So anyone that Green had owed debt to could come and say, hey, this is what I'm owed. Here's the stuff that proves what I'm owed. And then the judge would say yes or no. And some people were opportunist and they tried to get value from an estate when they didn't actually have a reason to, other than they wanted money. But sometimes it was as simple as they um, didn't file it in a timely manner, that kind of thing. There would have been advertisements in the local papers for people to, hey, if you have any outstanding debt against or to the estate of Green Adkins, you need to show up and pay it or show up and let us know how much he owed you. Otherwise, you lost out. So here is a different probate. This is a John Simon Linder, probate case 1259. and it was on index. Lender shows up on page 65. This just happens to be on 65A. And again, you can have 65A, B, C, D, etc., all the way through. More popular names have many more pages in various places. Um, so when we go over to probate case 1259, we get both a handwritten copy of the will, possibly a court clerk's copy of the will, but it's what was in the record. And then we also get a typed copy of the will that was done later. Do watch for um, sometimes the person typing it didn't get everything right. So you may find that there are slight differences between the transcript and the original, but either one can be very helpful for the intent of the deceased. Um, One of the things in this case was that there are pages torn at the fold throughout the file. So the paper got weak with folding and unfolding and folding and unfolding. Um, it does not appear that there's a lot of loss of what's between it, but because it was filmed with the gap, it's hard to tell what's there at that dividing line. So this may be a case where you want to see if you can contact the original court and find a better copy than the microfilm has. Um, but there may or may not be much information lost at that fold. It just depends on what was written there. Um, and then sometimes you don't luck out with legible handwriting. There are people who are literate who have chicken scratches instead of handwriting. And so you may find either because of a bad quill, a bad ink pen at the time, they were tired, the paper was rough or weird or something. They were writing on their lap instead of on a desk. I don't know. I'm sure there are many reasons, but sometimes you get really pretty handwriting that is also not readable. So sometimes it's just unreadable chicken scratches. Sometimes it's very ornate. But we always hope for, reasonably legible handwriting and for the ink to not spill across the page. Um, so do watch out for transcription errors. This is an example of some wills from a North Carolina will book. There was a period with the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, in the 1930s as part of the New Deal, that a lot of people were put to work transcribing court and other documents, which is great if you get somebody who is reasonably attentive to details and a decent typist. They did not have autocorrect in those days. They did not have easy correct typewriters like we had in the 80s. So sometimes you get stuff that it's scratched out because they had to retype or overtype or that kind of thing. And sometimes you just get they hit the wrong keys. So just know that you may have something typed, but that's at least the third iteration of the will or the document, because the first one is handwritten at the time, witnessed, signed by the witnesses at the time. Then there's the one that's recorded into the court minute book or the court record, which is in the clerk's hand. And then usually these transcripts are from that middle document. So every time there is a copy of it, there's a chance for error. Now, in most cases, there are relatively few errors. Our clerks of court, over time, were pretty attentive to detail and understood that this was a legal record that needed to be correct. But mistakes do creep in. And sometimes they're even more than those three versions of it by the time you get in. These are just two will examples. Handwritten is a transcription into the court record from the handwritten will. The typed is a later transcription. The one on the right is for a female named Amy Pittman in 1848. She is bequeathing personal property, not real property. It took me about 3.5 years, 4 years to figure out that her husband's name was Hardy Pittman, and he died the next county over, which is why I never could find him where I was looking. And Amy is my fourth great grandmother. And this record, this typed will is online at the South Carolina Department of Archives and History in their online records. And she's talking about bequeathing um, property, primarily enslaved property, that she had inherited not just from Hardy, from her husband, but from her father. Unnamed, but it was her personal property, not marital property. And so helping divide that out, and I'll talk a little bit at the end about a project that's ongoing, not in that county right now, but about how we are working to help the descendants of those enslaved find their possible ancestors more easily. But some of the property of this family was in Mississippi, which I've also had trouble tracing, but I'm working on it. Um, so some places do make you hunt a little bit. Georgia and North Carolina in particular. You have to access each piece of the file in the various record books rather than in a centralized probate file like South Carolina compiles. Um, Not all of the parts of the records will be available online. Some of them are digitized, some of them are not. More and more are being digitized, but it's still not 100% and probably will never be 100%. Um, Anna E. Thompson is my third great aunt, maybe. Um, she was raised by my third great grandmother. So anyway, but the dates in her probate file in Bibb County, Georgia, uh, run from 1929 to 1931. The process does take time, no matter what. And then the one above Anna there on the left top began in 1929, was finalized in 1941. So again, some are more complicated, some take more time. Um, Anna was probably the daughter of the husband of my great grandmother who raised her. According to her death certificate, her daughter claims him as dad and some other woman as mom, not the our joint ancestors. So you never know. I'm still trying to track down any descendants on that line with DNA. So you learn stuff when you look at these side relatives. If you can't find your direct relative, look at their family members, because sometimes you find the gold mine in the sibling's estate or an aunt or uncle's estate. If you are looking for enslaved and for women, both are harder to find in these types of documents because they are less likely. Well, enslaved will not have a probate for themselves. They were not allowed to own property until 1865. After 1865, it still took some time to um, build up any type of wealth. But in this particular um, will and file, this is the listing of inventory and valuation of Joseph Bass. Um, Again, one of my great, fourth great grandfathers. I think that's right. Um, but he died circa 1810. This list is done in about 1840 after the death of his wife, Martha. due to her life interest in the property. So women had a life interest in a third of the property or in the whole property, depending on how the will was written and the law of the time. So if you look here at the top where the green arrow is, it is one lot of Negro, say 14 head, valued at $3,500. And then it goes on for one lot of cattle, say 51 head for 230, one lot of horses, say 11 head, 700, one rocking chair, $60. So again, it is valuing the property of the family of the deceased, and it's not easy to look at. It is not easy to do, but sometimes we really hope for the fact that in a lot of these documents, the enslaved were named by name. And that is the little sliver of hope in these documents. Um, this is another example. John Buffet died circa 1820, another one of my great whatever grandfathers, fourth, fifth great grandfathers. Elisha, his son, this one gets a little juicy. The one son inherited the bulk of the land and the enslaved on the main plantation there outside of Latta, South Carolina. He did not have legal heirs at the time of the will. And so there's a whole paragraph plus of what's going to happen if Elisha dies without a legal heir and how that estate would redivide to all of the siblings and their children who were legal heirs. Um, if he never married, or had legal children. And it's very clear, legal children. So if he had a not legal child, that child did not inherit from daddy. Um, and John was very specific on this. Um, it does not name either of the daughters, any of the daughters, two of which were married. Those two son-in-laws get listed. So I know I've got the right John Buffet because I know who his son-in-law was. Um, and but the enslaved are listed by name and by who was to inherit them. So being able to trace that generation from one to the next is key in helping trace um, the descent through these families, both white families and African American families. And they are intertwined by life and circumstances and often DNA. And so I've never met a Buffet descendant who were not related either by DNA or by circumstance. So it's a large family. But anyway, but these documents can really help with that research. Um, so in South Carolina, the dower right of women stayed active as a law for far longer than it did in many states. Dower right typically meant one-third life interest in any property, real or personal, but not the right to then bequeath it. So Amy Pittman would have had life interest in that property, but what she was bequeathing in that will was her property, not necessarily from her husband, Hardy, but it would have been her property from her family or her if she had independent income as a seamstress or something. Some women did have independent income. Um, if she had remarried, she would have lost the dower rights unless the will specified otherwise. And for a long time, women could not own real property outright, so real estate land, but it could be held in trust for their use, benefit, and sometimes bequeathing. So it depended on how her father, typically, or her family member would have written his will, whether she had more rights to that property than typically given by law. But by law, if you were married and a woman, your husband, you were a femme covert, you were underneath that husband and he had all the legal rights. And this was the way of fathers who wanted to protect their little girls to separate and specify that the son-in-law was not to have any right to this property, to protect income, uh, family, and everything for their daughter. You don't see it as often as you might think, but I've seen it more often now that I'm looking for it. So, you know, um, dower rights. This is a Virginia case, and I'm not sure which. I don't have my notes on this one. But this is 1830. But it's talking about dower rights. When we get into real estate, the woman has to relinquish the dower rights. In probate, it's just kind of there. Occasionally, you will see a woman relinquish the third life estate on a property so that the property could be sold and then she would get the value of that third. And sometimes that worked out a lot better for the woman because she was able to move west or that kind of thing. She was not tied to that piece of property. So you see some variations. But in this one, it does talk about the dower rights, but it doesn't name her or the children who were very young, just that there was a wife and a child and children who were about this. So somebody didn't do their job when they were writing things up and get all the names. We always wish that we could get those names. So, um, things to remember. Enslaved African Americans were considered to be personal property and listed on estate accountings prior to emancipation in 1865. Or some were emancipated slightly before that. And in northern states, there were gradual emancipations over time. Earlier in New England and other northern states, there were enslaved there as well. The process was just done more gradually than what happened in the South. Do check the adjacent counties or where children were living in case the person moved shortly before death. Um, if there was no significant real or personal property, then it's less likely that they would have a will or probate. And if a trust has been set up, which we're seeing more today, but did happen on occasion, then there would not be probate unless it was contested. And in which case, you might see that in equity or chancery court, um, rather than just in probate court. If the primary heir was under 21, the estate would not be settled until that time that that child turned 21, which provides yearly updates on inventory, what was being spent to maintain the family and the property, and then the final accounting would happen after the son turned 21. I lucked out in a case in Darlington County, South Carolina, where my third great grandfather was working for a family who they were waiting for the 15-year-old to turn 21, the son, the only son. And it's a fascinating case to read because you get all of the employment information for those employed on the plantation, and which plantation he was working on. My ancestor was working on. And you also get the how much were they paying for the woman's bonnets and clothing? How much were they paying for the newspaper? How much were they paying for church tithes? Things like that that was coming in and out of that accounting on the estate. You do want to check wills and probate for in-laws, step-parents, particularly stepfathers, maternal and paternal grandparents, and siblings. Because if a sibling does not have children or heirs, legal heirs, they will be designating who they want things to go to, or if they die intestate, it is devised by the judge and the court per state law at the time. So you may find that they have to go down a couple of generations on all of the sidelines, and you may find wonderful genealogical information on those in those uh, one step away uh, probate cases. Some people did disperse their property before death, so check for deeds transferring land or enslaved people to heirs prior to the death. If somebody knew they were sick or they just decided they were old and tired, I'm going to let everybody take care of me now. So sometimes you get that. And then records of the enslaved were not typically indexed in the various court records because the indexes were done typically after 1865. And the people doing the indexes were like, who cares? It makes us look bad if we put this in. So the names are listed in the accounts, but not necessarily in the indexes at the county level. However, you can find them in the documents. There are projects, one of which we are participating in. Greenville County Public Library, South Carolina room staff began this project for identifying the names of enslaved in probate records in a variety of upstate counties. They have completed Greenville, Lawrence, Pendleton, Anderson, Pickens, and Spartanburg counties. My colleague Cheryl, and those are available here on their website. We also have printed copies in our room, so if you need a look up, let us know. But on their website, you can get to, oops, I forgot to make that second image fly in. Um, but and the link is in your handout. But Greenville Public Library Upstate African American Collection, I think is what it's called. Um, and they passed the baton to us because we have the Union County records, and they did not have all of the Union County records. They generally collect Greenville and their border the other direction from Spartanburg. We collect Spartanburg, Cherokee, Union, and of course, Cherokee wasn't formed at that time before 1865. It was formed in 1897. So we're working on Union. And then we may do some hard arm twisting on some of the other neighboring counties to see if their staff want to continue the project across the upstate. But you can see in this listing date range, that's when the probate was happening, and sometimes there's quite a range of years. The primary enslaver's name, secondary enslaver's name. So if they were going to, these enslaved were going to my wife Esther from Alexander, there's a relationship from the primary to the secondary who's inheriting, and then the enslaved person's names, um, a description if it's given. Sometimes it is. My cook Peg or um, young girl Mary or whatever. If there is an age given for the enslaved, and the value given at probate, which can also tell you, are they skilled labor, help estimate an age, that kind of thing. There's some social science books out there that can help you make those guesses at different time periods. And then the estate packet for that county. Um, so we're working on Cheryl, our team is working on, but Cheryl's doing the primary work on getting that finished for Union County. And so we are delighted to help. Those books have been so helpful for people researching in our room. As I said, they are available on Greenville County's digital collections in the upstate African American, I think is the name of it, the um, group. So, um, so do we have questions? And if you need the handout when you're watching the recording, this is the email address to send the request to, and we will get you that handout. Um,
Okay, Charity,
yes.
we do have some questions. Gabriel's
Okay.
keeping us busy.
Awesome.
Let me see, go back to the first one where um she said the one of the first things she wondered about, she said she wonders if an earlier will might still be found, you know.
Yeah, sometimes you find a will that had been registered with the court, again, often before a soldier went out to battle or that kind of thing. Um, Sometimes those are found in family collections as well. The one I saw that was that Civil War soldier, it was a descendant that walked in and said, "Hey, we found this. Is this actually the will?" And then we researched further and found the actual probate from the 1890s when the guy actually died. And I did have to explain, it was a young man, early 20s, and I did have to explain to him that after 1865, laws changed. Um, Sometimes you wonder what they're teaching in history class these days, but I also realize I listened more than my classmates because periodically we'll be talking about what we learned in history class, and I pull some factoid out, and they all looked at me and went, "We never heard that.
Mhm.
Were you not paying attention that day? I remember Coach talking about that." So it just depends. But yeah, they're going to be in local in family records typically, but occasionally you do find those earlier wills registered with the court, um, pre-use kind of things. In certain periods, it was popular to go ahead and register it and verify it, but then I think they started realizing there were too many times when the will got changed, and then there were competing official wills. And so that went out of practice again. Um, but yeah, you'll find them in family papers and stuff.
Okay.
You do have to check what actually got registered with the court.
Okay.
Okay.
Um, Gabrielle's keeping us busy, and I agree with
Okay.
her 100%. She loves full text search. It's the best thing that's happened in years.
Well, I am looking forward to that March program because it gives me an opportunity to spend some time digging deep into that so that I can present some how-tos for people. We've had a lot of staff in the room as well as patrons really get a lot of good stuff out of there. So yeah, I haven't had as much time to play with it. I've been playing with some DNA tools instead. So,
Charity, do you know if
yeah,
the index is on family search? You know, if the files numbers are there
yep,
also? I think we're talking about the Spartanburg
yep.
County wills.
Um, Spartanburg County probate is the index is there. Um, if you're in the catalog, you go to Spartanburg County, and then you look for indexes to probate and or indexes to wills and probate. I can't remember what they call that collection right now. And then you go and it's the same process. It's the look for the surname in the first part of the subindex, look for the page in the second part of the index, and then scan down and find the right file number.
Okay.
Um, so yeah. Now I'm not sure what has been included with most recently with Family Search's full text. It may all be in that now. Um, I'm glad I waited till March to do that program because I was going to do it last fall. And then I'm like, they're changing stuff too much and I need to do these other couple things. So March seems to be a really good time to do that.
Okay,
Um,
Charity, you may
yeah,
want to read the. Do you see in the chat Gabrielle's next question? It's about her second great grandfather that he died intestate. She has a question there. I just thought you might be able to understand it more fully than I
I
did.
I don't see
Okay,
that.
let
Did
me
it go to
read it to
you?
you. Let me
Okay.
read it to you. It says, "My second great grandfather died intestate. The third
Mhm.
wife was the administratrix, and there ended up being two administrations done. Why or
Mhm.
how does that happen?"
So sometimes being the administratrix can eliminate you from being an heir. If you are set to inherit, then you are not supposed to be the administrator or that kind of thing in an estate. Now that the law of that depends on the time and place, and I'm not specifically up on South Carolina law as to whether you can or can't, but typically you're going to see um sometimes you see a spouse, that kind of thing. But if there is something contested in that file, often you will see that first administrator or administratrix back off and resign from being the administrator so that they are eligible to be an heir. Um, the other thing you may see is sometimes it gets more complex than that person is willing to deal with. You also see executors named in the will, and they go into court and they say, nope, not interested. I can't do this now. And so that's when the court will then assign someone else.
Okay.
The other time you see administrators or those people in those roles change is somebody moved out of the area after they were named. And so they weren't coming back from Tennessee to administer an estate or be an executor of an estate in South Carolina. It just was not physically feasible. We did not have airplanes. Um, and so that happens. Sometimes it's a family member, like a son-in-law who's named, or a nephew who's named, and then relationships changed, or feelings got hurt, or all of those family dynamics. And so sometimes that also meant a change in personnel. But I think probably in that situation with the third wife, um, there was something in the law that they weren't aware of that it came to their attention that, if you're doing this, you can't actually inherit that. And that's likely what was going on.
Okay.
So,
Gabrielle, thank you so much for
yep,
your questions and your comments. We appreciate that. Moving on, Charity,
yep,
William Durant asks,
yep.
can volunteers help with the indexing project via crowdsourcing online, or must it all be done on site?
At the moment, our systems people are having conniption fits about too many people having logins to things. And so right now we are limited to staff only doing that transcription and indexing. Stay tuned though. Our head of our archives and digitization group and I keep bugging administration to allow us to do a crowdsourcing um, project for transcription of some of our records. We've been digitizing the Spartanburg County Deed Book series one digit and two digits, so the A's and the double A's, those series of deeds. And there's got to be a lot of transcription done on those. And so we are working on trying to let us set up a transcription project. It's just we got to be squeaky wheels long enough. Keep an ear out for that. There are projects. I know Library of Virginia has a couple of crowdsourcing projects on their records. In fact, they've got a revolutionary one that is just getting started here in the next little bit. Um, so keep an eye out for that one. Um, and I know Library of Congress and National Archives have National Archives in particular has citizen archivists who do transcriptions for them. So there are some projects. We do not currently have projects. We're hoping to. So,
Okay. And
ah,
William also said he has some ancestors from Marion County too.
well, if you've got Bethays, Allens, Basses, and a couple others, let me know because I'm sure, related. Um, Historic Marion's great. But yeah,
Okay.
my
And
grandfather was born in just outside of Latta. So, yep.
and if you're not seeing the chat, Gabrielle was saying that yes, she's tying this together to let you know how it ended up. There was an earlier final settlement, and then another file occurred, and it does appear that there was infighting of the siblings of all the wives.
Yep.
Okay, and
Yeah,
I
and that's where the equity court and chancery court, when those are in play, really do make for some interesting reading. I have a great equity chancery court case in Virginia that it went back to chancery court twice. The person who died in 1832, left no, did not say until she remarries, left stuff to the wife. She remarried twice more, and there was a chancery court case in 1835 because the other two women named holding things in trust for their children still haven't figured out any relationship to Francis, the person who died. But they were afraid that the widow was not going to pass along the benefits, proceeds of the labor of the enslaved. And by 1835, one of the four enslaved had already disappeared. And then it was 1850 something when the second Chancery Court occurred, um, because Margaret was the widow's name, had married the second time to someone who was a known abolitionist. And this was on the Eastern Shore of Virginia. And there were stipulations in the original that the enslaved could not be taken out of the state of Virginia. But it was one thing after another in this. And of course, by the time Margaret died, emancipation was in process anyway. So,
mhm.
but these cases can go on for quite some time, um, especially if it's a much younger wife than the husband. So,
Okay, so everyone's saying excellent presentation and thank yous all around. And we thank you guys for coming and sharing your questions and your comments with us.
thank you very much. You can catch this in a couple of days on the recording on the Spartanburg County Public Library's YouTube channel in the genealogy playlist. So, thank you very much. Let us know if you have questions. Lincoln's.